December 23, 1944. Leyte, Philippines. The rain hammered the jungle canopy like 1,000 fists, and beneath it, Private First Class Robert Hayes crouched in a shell crater, gripping a weapon that looked like it belonged in a mechanic's garage, not a battlefield. The M3 submachine gun stamped steel, crude welds. A wire stock that rattled felt impossibly light in his hands, almost toy-like compared to the Thompson his sergeant carried. Japanese voices rose somewhere in the green tangle ahead, growing louder, closer. Hayes thumbed the safety off, and the metal slide made a sound like change dropping on pavement. In that moment, staring at this $20 factory reject, he wondered if American industry had finally cut one corner too many. Before we dive deeper, if you're enjoying this journey through history, hit like and subscribe to keep these stories alive. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from Tokyo, Texas, or anywhere between. Your support helps these untold tales continue for everyone. The jungle swallowed sound differently than the forests of Europe. Every crack of a branch, every drip of water from a leaf carried weight. Hayes had been on Leyte for 3 weeks, and he'd learned that distances meant nothing here. A man could be 5 feet away and invisible until he was on you with a bayonet. The M3 in his hands weighed just 8 pounds. Half what his old Thompson had. It felt fragile, disposable, like something you'd throw away after one firefight. But headquarters had taken his Thompson 2 days ago, handed him this stamped metal substitute, and told him to make it work. No ceremony, no explanation. Just a weapon that looked like someone had welded together scrap metal and called it progress. Then the first Japanese soldier burst from the undergrowth, bayonet fixed, eyes wide with the fury of a banzai charge. Hayes squeezed the trigger. The M3 barked a low, stuttering roar, and .45 caliber rounds punched through the humid air at 450 rounds per minute. The soldier dropped instantly, mid-stride, as though invisible strings had been cut. Another followed, then another. Hayes swept the crude barrel left, right, the wire stock vibrating against his shoulder. Bodies fell like dominoes, and in 6 seconds the jungle was silent again, except for the rain. Hayes stared at the smoking weapon in his hands, at the simplicity of its design, at the absolute finality of its work. And in that moment he realized this ugly piece of stamped steel had just saved his life, and he had no idea how many more times it would do the same before the war ended. The M3 submachine gun was born not from tradition, but from desperation wrapped in American pragmatism. By 1942, the United States faced a problem that no amount of bravery could solve. The nation needed millions of weapons, and it needed them yesterday. The Thompson submachine gun, beloved by gangsters and GIS alike, was a masterpiece of machining, and that was exactly the problem. Each Thompson required 40 hours of skilled labor and cost $200 to manufacture, the equivalent of $3,600 today. America was churning out soldiers faster than it could arm them. The production lines couldn't keep pace with the draft boards. In a cluttered office in Dayton, Ohio, a design engineer named George Hyde sat at his drafting table, sketching something that would have horrified John Thompson. Hyde wasn't interested in elegance or tradition. He was interested in steel, stamps, and speed. His brief was simple: create a submachine gun that could be produced in a fraction of the time, for a fraction of the cost, using manufacturing methods borrowed from the automotive industry. No milling, no precision machining, just bend, stamp, weld, and assemble. Make it so simple, a teenager in a factory could build one in 3 hours. What emerged looked more like a mechanic's tool than a weapon of war. The M3 had no wooden furniture, no carefully machined receiver, no polished bluing. Its barrel was stamped from sheet steel. Its stock was a wire frame that folded flat. The entire weapon could be disassembled with a single tool or even a coin. Soldiers took one look at it and named it the grease gun because it resembled the pneumatic tools used to lubricate vehicles. The nickname wasn't a compliment. It was a joke, a sneer, a way of saying that American industry had finally cheaped out when lives were on the line. But numbers told a different story. By late 1943, factories were producing M3 submachine guns for $20 each, 1/10 the cost of a Thompson. Production time dropped from 40 hours to fewer than 5. The weapon was so simple it had only 23 moving parts, compared to the Thompson's 70. It could be manufactured on the same stamping presses that turned out car fenders and washing machine panels. America's industrial might, the same force that built Liberty ships in 4 days and B-24 bombers by the thousands, had turned its attention to infantry weapons. And in doing so, it created something the enemy would learn to fear, not because it was beautiful, but because it was everywhere. Robert Hayes had been a factory worker himself before the war, assembling radios in Newark. He understood stamped metal, spot welds, the economy of mass production. When he first held the M3, his hands recognized the language of its construction. This wasn't craftsmanship, it was efficiency distilled to its purest form. The weapon's simplicity was its genius. Fewer parts meant fewer failures. Stamped steel didn't warp in the jungle humidity the way wooden stocks did. The wireframe stock didn't rot, didn't splinter, didn't absorb water and swell. In the rain-soaked hell of the Pacific, the M3's crudeness became a virtue. The Japanese, by contrast, carried weapons forged in a different philosophy. Their Type 100 submachine gun was a finely machined piece, elegant in its way, but complex and expensive to produce. Japan's industrial capacity in 1944 was a shadow of America's. The empire produced fewer than 10,000 submachine guns during the entire war. America would produce over 600,000 M3 South and M3A1 South by war's end. The difference wasn't just in numbers, it was in mindset. Japan built weapons for soldiers. America built them for wars. In the weeks after Hayes received his M3, the weapon proved itself in ways no manual could describe. During a night patrol near the village of Bureuen, his squad stumbled into a Japanese ambush. Rifles jammed in the mud. The Thompson his sergeant carried misfired twice before the bolt locked open. But Hayes's M3 kept firing slow, deliberate, unstoppable. The low cyclic rate meant he could fire single shots with just a tap of the trigger, conserving ammunition, placing each round with intention. The Japanese had expected chaos, the wild spray of automatic fire. What they got was precision delivered through crude machinery. Hayes later wrote home, "The gun looks like hell, but it shoots like a dream. You don't aim it so much as point it, and whatever you point it stops moving." His letter, censored and delayed, arrived in Newark 3 months later. By then, Hayes had already used the M3 in 7 more engagements. He'd learned its rhythms, its quirks, the way it heated up after 50 rounds and needed a moment to breathe. He cleaned it with nothing more than a rag and rifle oil, marveling at how little maintenance it required. The M3 didn't demand respect, it earned it through relentless functionality. Word spread through the ranks. Units that had mocked the grease gun began requesting it. Tank crews loved it because the wire stock folded flat, making it easy to store in cramped compartments. Paratroopers appreciated its light weight and compact profile. In the hedgerows of Normandy, in the rubble of Manila, in the frozen forests of the Bulge, the M3 appeared unremarkable, unglamorous, but present. It became the weapon you gave to drivers, radio operators, officers who needed something more than a pistol, but less cumbersome than a rifle. It filled the gaps in the American arsenal, and in doing so, it became indispensable. The Japanese noticed. Captured documents from early 1945 reveal intelligence reports describing the new American automatic weapon with a mixture of confusion and concern. Officers noted its crude appearance but warned their troops not to underestimate it. One report, translated after the war, read, "Enemy submachine gun appears cheaply made, yet fires with devastating effect at close range. Soldiers should not assume inferior quality indicates inferior performance." The irony was bitter. Japan, a nation that prized craftsmanship and tradition, was being outgunned by a weapon that looked like it had been assembled in a garage. By the time Hayes's unit landed on Okinawa in April 1945, the M3 had evolved from a joke into a legend. New replacements arrived still carrying the prejudice, calling it the grease gun with a smirk, but veterans corrected them quickly. "You'll love it or you'll die ignoring it," one sergeant told a fresh-faced private. "Either way, it won't care." The weapon had no ego, no mythology, no sacred reputation to uphold. It simply worked. And in the grinding, exhausting crucible of the Pacific War, that was all that mattered. The rain had stopped by the time Hayes's platoon reached the outskirts of Shuri Castle, but the earth remained a slick, treacherous bog. Okinawa was worse than anything he'd seen, worse than Leyte, worse than the photographs of Iwo Jima that circulated through camp. The Japanese had fortified every ridge, every cave, every inch of coral limestone. They fought from tunnels that swallowed grenades and spat back gunfire. Flamethrowers became the weapon of choice, but when the fuel ran out, soldiers reverted to bullets and bayonets and anything that could kill at arm's length. Hayes moved through the rubble with his M3 slung low, its wire stock extended, the bolt cocked back. The weapon's simplicity meant he could load it in the dark, clear a jam with his fingers, operate it even when mud caked the receiver. Around him, men with M1 Garans struggled to keep their rifles clean in the muck. The 8-round clip system, brilliant in open combat, became a liability when every reload meant exposing your hands and head. But the M3, with its detachable box magazine and open bolt design, kept spitting rounds even when Hayes couldn't see what he was shooting at. A burst of fire erupted from a cave entrance 30 yards ahead. Hayes dropped to one knee, leveled the M3, and squeezed. The .45 caliber rounds sparked against limestone, chipping away at the cave mouth, forcing the defenders deeper. He didn't need accuracy at this range, he needed volume and suppression. The slow rate of fire meant his 30-round magazine lasted longer than a Thompson's 20-round drum at full cyclic rate. He could sustain fire, control the tempo, make each magazine stretch when resupply was uncertain. Beside him, a corporal with a brand-new M3A1, the updated version, with a cocking lever instead of the finicky bolt handle, grinned through the grime on his face. $20 of stamped garbage, he muttered, and it's worth more than gold out here. Hayes nodded. The M3A1 had refined the design even further, eliminating the fragile charging handle and adding a finger hole in the bolt. It was simpler still, cheaper still, and it worked even better. American engineers had taken a weapon already stripped to its essence and stripped it further. There was a kind of poetry in that. Hayes thought a haiku written in steel and function. The fighting dragged on for days, then weeks. Shuri fell, then the next ridge, then the next. Hayes lost count of how many times he fired the M3, how many magazines he burned through. The weapon became an extension of his body, familiar as his own hands. He knew the exact pressure needed to fire single shots, the angle to hold it to compensate for the slight upward pull. He learned that if he fired too long without pause, the barrel heated enough to burn through fabric, so he rationed his bursts, letting the metal cool between engagements. One night, during a brief lull, Hayes sat in a foxhole and disassembled his M3 by feel. Bolt out. Magazine well empty. Barrel guard removed. The components lay in his lap like puzzle pieces, and he cleaned each one with a rag already black with oil and dirt. He reassembled it in under 2 minutes, no manual, no instructions. The weapon's design was so intuitive that even exhaustion couldn't obscure its logic. This, he realized, was the true genius of the M3, not that it was simple, but that it was simple in a way that respected the soldier using it. It assumed you were tired, scared, covered in mud, and possibly wounded. It forgave mistakes. It kept working when everything else failed. Japanese prisoners interrogated after the battle spoke of the American automatic pistol that never stops. They had seen Thompsons before, heard their distinctive chatter, but the M3 was new, unfamiliar, and its low, methodical fire was somehow more unnerving than the Thompson's wild roar. It sounded deliberate, calculated, like a machine that couldn't be reasoned with or frightened. One prisoner, a lieutenant who spoke broken English, told his captors, "Your soldiers carry cheap guns, but they kill like expensive ones." The translator wrote it down, and the quote made its way into an intelligence report that no one important ever read. But it captured a truth that Hayes and thousands like him already knew. The M3 didn't win battles through superiority of firepower or technological innovation. It won through sheer presence by being there in the hands of every driver, every tanker, every soldier who needed more than a pistol but couldn't carry a full rifle. It filled the logistical gaps in the American war machine, and in doing so, it multiplied the effectiveness of that machine exponentially. For every M3 produced, another soldier could fight effectively at close range. For every $20 saved, another weapon could be shipped, another unit could be armed. The calculus was cold, but it worked. By June 1945, as Okinawa finally fell silent, Hayes had carried his M3 through 4 major campaigns. The weapon's finish was gone, worn away by salt air and constant handling. The stamped steel showed scratches, dents, and the patina of hard use. But it still fired, the bolt still cycled. The magazine still seated with a satisfying click. Hayes had seen Thompsons fail, bars jam, even the vaunted M1 Garand choke on sand or mud. But the M3, ugly and unloved, had never quit on him, not once. In the days after the battle, as survivors gathered to bury the dead and count the living, Hayes overheard a conversation between two replacement officers fresh from stateside training. One of them pointed at his M3 and asked, "Is that really what we're issuing now? Looks like a toy." The other laughed. "Wait until you use it. Then tell me it's a toy." Hayes didn't say anything. He just checked his magazine, wiped down the receiver, and slung the weapon over his shoulder. The grease gun had earned its place. It didn't need defenders. It had history now, written in firefights and foxholes, and the quiet moments when a weapon worked when nothing else would. The war ended in August, but the M3's story didn't. While the Thompson became a museum piece, a relic of a more romanticized era, the M3 soldiered on. It served in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond, carried by tankers, vehicle crews, and support personnel who valued function over flash. The U.S. military officially retired it in 1992, nearly 50 years after its introduction. Some special operations units kept them even longer, appreciating the weapon's simplicity and reliability in environments where maintenance was a luxury. Robert Hayes came home in late 1945, his M3 left behind in some Pacific depot, destined for storage or scrap. He returned to the radio factory in Newark, resumed his old life, married, and raised 2 children. He rarely spoke of the war, but when he did, he always mentioned the grease gun, not with nostalgia or sentimentality, but with the plain respect one professional gives another. It wasn't pretty, he'd say, but it got the job done. That's all you can ask. Years later, historians would analyze the M3, noting its influence on post-war submachine gun design. The British Sten, the Soviet PPS-43, the Israeli Uzi all shared the M3's philosophy of simplicity, stamped construction, and low cost. The weapon had proven that elegance was optional, that a gun didn't need to be beautiful to be effective. His face is gaunt, his eyes tired, but his hands rest easy on the weapon. There's no pride in his posture, no bravado, just the quiet acknowledgement of something that worked when it mattered most. The laughter that greeted the grease gun faded quickly, replaced by the sound it made in action. A low, steady stutter that echoed through jungles, across beaches, and in the cramped interiors of tanks rolling toward victory. That sound was its legacy, and it resonated long after the last shot was fired.